like to talk about movies that are really dark and metaphorical and deep. But sometimes I just want to talk about a movie that could make me laugh and just have fun. So I'm talking about my favorite comedies of all time. Keep in mind that some of these movies are really tasteless and disgusting and twisted. And there are some really artsy comedies out there, but none of my picks are particularly artsy. They are mostly just disgusting and tasteless. But maybe it's just a reflection of who I am. And number 5 is Analyze This, and it stars Billy Crystal and Robert De Niro. And we know that Billy Crystal is a funny guy. You already know that. But Robert De Niro really establishes himself as a comedic actor in this movie. This was 1999, which was before he did Dirty Grandpa, before he did Meet the Parents. So at this point, he still hasn't established himself as a comedic actor yet. So with this movie, he gave out a really surprising performance that was very funny, and I thought his performance was very impressive and really excellent too. He plays a over-the-top version of the usual roles that he plays, which are usually mafia roles. He plays a lot of gangsters in movies, and he's really good at that. And in this movie, he plays a gangster that is incredibly vulgar and fierce and always angry all the time. It's like a cartoonish version of the roles that he plays. And I think he plays it really well, and he plays it really well to comedic effect as well. This movie gives him a lot to work with comedically, and he pulls off most of that really wonderfully. Harold Ramis as the director does a really good job of melding two different genres together. One genre is comedy and the other genre is like a gangster movie, and he melds both these genres together really well, and you see a lot of parts in the movie that really feel like you're watching a gangster movie. But there are also a lot of parts of the movie that are incredibly funny that you just won't get from a usual gangster movie. And number 4 is The Party, starring Peter Sellers. Now this movie was made in the 60s, and that was a really different time, culturally speaking. So at that time it was acceptable for Peter Sellers to do blackface, but something like that simply isn't culturally appropriate by modern standards. And let that be a reminder of how much we have progressed as a species. And it's really no excuse for the racism that is on display in this movie. But with that said, I think this movie, all that blackface stuff aside, is a very funny movie. And I think the physical comedy by Peter Sellers is really good. A lot of the laughs in the movie come from his physical performance more than his verbal performance. He does a lot of the comedy through his body movements and his facial expressions. And he speaks in this movie. It's not like a silent movie or anything. But when I think about the funniest scenes in a movie, it's almost always the scenes that are entirely physical with very minimal dialogue. And I think he's a really gifted physical actor. I just don't really see the necessity for him to do blackface in his movie. But as I said, it was a culturally different time in the 60s. And I can see this movie being a precursor to Mr. Bean in a lot of ways. How this character is a bumbling idiot, but at the same time has a heart of gold. And number 3 is Naked Gun. Naked Gun is a spoof movie that parodies a lot of police procedural movies, and it was directed by the Zucker brothers, who have a really specific style of comedy. A lot of their comedy comes from the visual humor, like the kind of background, there's a newspaper in the background, and when you actually read what the newspaper is saying, it's usually saying something that's really funny and just really out of place. And one of the funniest things about this movie is, in spite of all of the visual humor that is going on around these characters, the characters always keep a straight face. They always have a face that goes like... And that straight face is what makes this movie so funny. Leslie Nielsen especially is really good at keeping a straight face through really bizarre situations. Not to mention that he also has a very inspirational career. His career only really started when he was in his 50s. So that was really inspirational. And Priscilla Presley is also really good in this movie as the romantic interest to Leslie Nielsen. Similarly, she also keeps a straight face throughout the movie, like every other character. but the situations that they are in is just so bizarre. Also, the Zucker brothers just have mastered the style of visual comedy at this point. This point they already made Airplane, and their style of comedy is just so refined, and in this movie there's so many visual humor. They are blink it and you'll miss it. They are so fast and so consistent and so rapid that you'll eventually find something that you could laugh about. Then I think it has one of the funniest scenes in movie history near the end on a baseball field. That's all I'm going to say. Just watch the movie and you'll know what I'm talking about. And number 2 is American Pie, a sex comedy about a bunch of teenagers trying to lose their virginity. And this movie is really sweet. First and foremost, let's talk about the side of this movie that you would want to hear first. Let's talk about all the disgusting stuff later. Let's talk about how sweet this movie is first, and how the characters are really likable goofballs. And I really like the characters, and after watching all the sequels to this movie, I've grown an emotional attachment to these characters, and I like seeing them grow. I like seeing them do what they do. But this first movie is really the funniest, and it's also the one where I feel the most emotional investment in. Now let's talk about all the disgusting, tasteless stuff now. This movie has a very cringy sense of humor, and it often puts you in the shoes of the characters in very embarrassing situations that you really don't want to be in. But the movie forces you to be in these really embarrassing situations, and you get like a very nervous chuckle out of these situations. It has a very special sense of humor where the comedy comes from just how cringe-worthy a lot of situations are. And there are some parts of the movie where you really feel like closing your eyes because you know that something bad is going to happen with the characters. And that anticipation is also part of the humor of the movie. Also, I like the way the jokes set up. The jokes take a pretty long time to set up when compared to a few other comedy movies that I mentioned earlier. But once the joke is set up, once the payoff comes, it's always worth it. The payoff is always worth the long setups because it's always really funny, and it always hits me right at my laughing spot, if there's even a spot called the laughing spot. And number 1 is Dumb and Dumber, what I think to be Jim Carrey's best movie and his best performance, and one of the best scripts ever written in comedy history. The script is just so outrageous, and it was written by the Farrelly brothers, and you can see interviews about people saying how much they laughed when reading the script before they made the movie. People behind the making of this movie, the producers, the filmmakers. And I must say, first of all, the making of this movie is really inspirational. So many studios turned down this script for not being funny enough, but they eventually got to make this movie, and that determination eventually paid off for what I think to be the funniest movie. Not the funniest movie, but the best comedy of all time. Also one of the best friendships of all time, if not the best. Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels have such a good friendship in this movie, and the jokes here are also really funny because of the way that Farrelly brothers direct comedy. Usually when directors direct comedy, they have one joke and they tell that joke nicely, they move on to the next joke. But with the Farrelly brothers, they tell one joke, they expand on that joke, and they expand on that joke again, and they expand on that joke until it couldn't be expanded any further. That's how they tell a joke. They keep double downing on it. The same thing goes to their other movies, like There's Something About Mary, their toilet scene. They could stop anywhere earlier, but they don't. They always find a way to make the joke even bigger and bigger and bigger. And their commitment to every single joke in the movie makes the movie really consistent. Because in some comedies, the funny parts always happen earlier in the movie, and then the later parts start to become more dull, and they aren't as funny as the earlier parts. But that doesn't happen in Dumb and Dumber because of the Farrelly brothers' commitment to every single joke in the movie. I think it's a really funny movie. I think Jeff Daniels and Jim Carrey have a very good chemistry, and I think Dumb and Dumber is my favorite comedy of all time. So here are some of my favorite comedies, and I hope you enjoy them.